Bartholomew. So let's look at the next slide here, who in John's Gospel is known as Nathaniel. Bartholomew translates to the son of Ptolemy, and Ptolemy is actually an agricultural term, so it is possible that Bartholomew means the son of the furrows. So maybe his family were farmers. But Bartholomew might have been a nickname. Nathaniel was a common name at the time. Nathaniel was a good Jewish name. Bartholomew is a little odd. He was from Cana in Galilee. Whether he was at the wedding is unknown, but it's possible that he was there, and it's probable that he would have heard about what happened at the wedding and apparently been interested by it. John 1, Bartholomew, Nathaniel, is the guy who is skeptical about the idea of a Savior who might come from Galilee. He is introduced to Jesus by Philip, and Jesus sees him as a straight shooter straight out of the box, an Israelite indeed in whom there is no deceit. This guy just tells you, which might mean that Bartholomew was a little unfiltered. That's another way to think about the same thing. He is always listed in the New Testament with Philip. And otherwise is not, he's just on the list and in the one story in John and not otherwise further noted in the New Testament. And Bartholomew is one of the most confusing of the apostles to track down because there are so many different Bartholomew stories. And they go all over the place. So in the images here, the top left is the ruins of the St. Bartholomew Monastery in Armenia. That's a photo from 1913 at the top left. Same place in 2009 at the bottom right. The St. Bartholomew Monastery is not in what is presently Armenia, it's in ancient Armenia. So right now it sits on the border of Turkey and Iraq, and that's put it in a position where there has been no ability to preserve it, and trouble has dogged it for years. But it is alleged to have been built on the site of Bartholomew's martyrdom. There is attestation about this monastery from at least the 13th century, but there's traditions that go much earlier than that. And the original monastery that was built in the 13th century was built on ruins of something that existed there before. It's unclear what. This is the traditional spot of Bartholomew's tomb. The monastery was very prominent in the life of the church from about 1300 to 1500. It was a source of, a site of meetings. It was a place that significant translation work happened. It was abandoned in 1915 during the Armenian genocide. It was a casualty of that. The painting at the bottom left is painted by a guy named Simone Martini between 1317 and 1319. Bartholomew is holding two things, but one of the things that's interesting about this painting is Bartholomew is consistently shown as a guy with curly hair, a full head of hair, and a curly beard. And he is not often shown gray. He is shown as having kept his hair color. He is pictured with the book, as he is here a lot, but more interestingly, he is also routinely pictured with a flensing knife, as he is in this picture. And you can see the knife in his right hand, curving up. The knife is something that early images of Bartholomew almost always have. At the top right is a sculpture by a guy named Marco de Grate that was done in 1562 of Bartholomew. It's in the Duomo of Milan, the great cathedral. And you're probably thinking it's kind of weird looking. because it is a marble sculpture of a man whose skin has been removed. He has been flayed, which is what you use a flensing knife for. Bartholomew is traditionally believed to have been flayed alive. And so you almost always see pictures of Bartholomew holding the knife by which you might do that. Anyway, that's about the most horrible, of all the horrible ways that apostles died. Bartholomew is the potential champion on that, if that's true. There's a wide variety of things about Bartholomew, though, that are hard to know. What does it mean? Bartholomew, the son of Ptolemy. There's a Ptolemy in the Old Testament. In 2 Samuel, there's a guy named Ptolemy. He's the king of Geshur, which is a small kingdom to the east of Israel. And he's in the Old Testament because David, the king, married his daughter, Maacah. And they had a son, and his name was Absalom. And Jerome, the guy who translated the Bible into Latin, says, wait a minute, the son of Ptolemy. In the ancient world, if you're listed as the son of somebody, it doesn't mean that that person was your physical dad. It means that you were descended from that person. So if your great-great-grandfather was a famous person, you would be known as the son of that person, rather than as the son of your specific father. So when we say the son of Ptolemy, it might mean that Bartholomew is of the house of Ptolemy, which would mean that he has royal lineage. Jerome thought that was pretty cool. And so that's a stretch, and a long stretch. But Jerome fostered the idea that the son of Ptolemy was related to the hereditary kings of Geshur, to the east of Israel, and that therefore one of the 12 among, these low-rent fishermen was a man of royal lineage. Probably not true, but it's kind of fun. Anyway, so there is a heretical writing called the Gospel of Bartholomew, which narrates questions that Bartholomew allegedly asked Jesus and Mary between the resurrection and the ascension. It says that Bartholomew was the guy that seized the opportunity to ask him a whole bunch of, okay, explain this and tell me about that and what happened here. Jerome said he saw the whole thing and it was super interesting. It exists today only in some really small fragments, and so it's really difficult to know what might be in it. In any case, Bartholomew's ministry is long associated with Parthia, the Parthian Empire, Persia and Armenia, and maybe also Arabia. There is a bench of tradition that says he served with Philip at Hierapolis. Both John Chrysostom and Jerome say he was ministering in Turkey, and there is a story that Bartholomew and Philip got into controversy in Hierapolis, and the king, the local king there, or the local Roman leader, had them crucified, and Philip was crucified upside down and died, and Bartholomew was crucified right side up for some reason and was somehow rescued and survived, and then went to Armenia. Eusebius, of course, says that Thomas and Bartholomew went to Parthia in India, and both Eusebius and Jerome, who's probably working from Eusebius, have Bartholomew visiting India and then going back to Armenia and being martyred in Armenia. Eusebius implies that Bartholomew translated Matthew's gospel into a local language in northern or central India, and that he is perhaps the first translator of a part of the New Testament into a language other than the languages that were common at the time in Judea. So if he he is known as the founder of the church and the patron of the church in Armenia, and is held in very high esteem there. It is possible that he went to Armenia and spent a significant amount of time there, a decade or more, and then went to India and was martyred in India. It seems very likely that he went to India and then went back to Armenia. That geography doesn't make that much sense. So if he went to India, it seems likely that he went to kind of north central India, around the area around what is now Mumbai, Bombay, that area, which was the Satavahan Empire at the time, which wasn't a very big empire, and that he arrived around AD 60 or so, after a decade or so in Armenia, and that is where he was martyred. But he and Judas, the son of James, who we already talked about, are regarded as the founders of the Armenian church. And much of what was ancient Armenia at the time is now in Iran and Azerbaijan, and some of it down into the Turkey-Iraq area. Ancient Armenia was much larger than Armenia is today. It is believed that maybe he was crucified at Albanopolis, which is now called Derbend and is on the Caspian Sea, on the north side of Armenia, or at a place called Albana or Albanus in the Caucasus around 68 or 70 AD, or maybe in 62. The story that goes with the martyrdom of Bartholomew has to do with him coming in and finding that the daughter of the king was insane and horribly dangerous, such that they had created a barred cage that they kept her in because no one could control her, and that Bartholomew healed her. And as a result, many people were converted to the faith, and that the local priests or the other locals responded to that by taking revenge on Bartholomew and flaying him alive and then cutting his head off, which he would probably be dead anyway if no one survives being flayed. In any case, the question, of course, is, did this happen in Armenia or did this happen in India? And flaying wasn't something that was part of the deal in Armenia. So despite the fact that the Armenian church today claims that Bartholomew was martyred there, and there's a monastery that's built on the spot that they say this occurred, it is more likely that if he died by flaying, that happened in India than that happened in Armenia. It is certain that Armenia, that Bartholomew ministered in Armenia, that he was the apostle who took the gospel there. The Armenians, the church there is very ancient, very much from the first century. The first king of Armenia that we know to have been converted to faith was a guy named Tiridates the Great in AD 301. But Christianity was already a couple of centuries old in Armenia at that time, and it's altogether possible that there were earlier kings that were converted. By the 3rd century, Armenian pilgrims were coming to Jerusalem to see the things that they'd read about in the Gospels, the places. So the church there is very old. In art, Bartholomew is commonly depicted with a beard and curly hair, but he is also just depicted holding a flensing knife or holding his skin. Okay, I didn't get one of those pictures for you, but there are a lot of pictures going way back and from much more recently that have Bartholomew flayed and holding his skin. as sort of a trophy. He is the subject of a great deal of medieval art. The places that claim to have remains of Bartholomew include churches at Benevento in Italy, at Rome in Italy, in Frankfurt in Germany, and at Canterbury Cathedral in England. Edward the Confessor said that he received relics of Bartholomew and gave them to Canterbury Cathedral. The front end of how do you get Bartholomew's remains from either Armenia or more likely central India to any of those places, the first 500 or 1,000 miles of those stories are all miraculous. So the chain of custody on the front end is broken. So make what you will of that. So, and then lastly, let's talk briefly about Philip, or more likely, Philip. One of the 12 was Philip. Philip is a Greek name. He might have been a disciple of John the Baptist. He was from the town of Bethsaida on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. He's the guy that brought Nathaniel Bartholomew to Jesus, and apparently they were friends. Why is he named Philip? Well, the Tetrarch, the Roman client ruler of Iturea at the time, was Herod Philip II, son of Herod the Great. And Herod Philip II made Bethsaida the capital of Iturea. And if you live in Bethsaida, and Herod Philip just made Bethsaida, your hometown, important and significant and made it the capital and put a lot of money into building it up, the chances that you might name your son Philip are significantly increased. If so, he's probably a Hellenized Jew and maybe a fairly liberal Jew. All the New Testament references, other than just his name on the list, to Philip in the Bible are in John and in Acts. And the relics, the remains of Philip, are held in Rome, where they are believed to have been brought from Hierapolis, which is the town that is close to Laodicea and Colossae. So here's the problem. There are two Philips, right? There's the Philip who's one of the 12, and there's the Philip who's one of the 7 from Acts chapter 6. So we have Philip the apostle, and we have Philip the deacon. And by Acts chapter 21, we have, on the next day we departed and came to Caesarea, and we entered the house of Philip the Evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. So Luke says that Philip the Evangelist, and we know Philip the Apostle and Philip the Evangelist down through the ages, that Philip the Evangelist is the Philip who was one of the 7 deacons appointed in Acts chapter 6. So, if that's true, then Philip the Evangelist, who had the 4 virgin daughters who were prophetesses, and at least 2 of whom are believed to have never married after living long lives, is the guy who converted Simon Magus, the guy who converted the Ethiopian eunuch, the guy who brought the gospel to Samaria, the guy who lived in Caesarea for 20 years or something like that and hosted Paul, and almost certainly the guy that later moved to Hierapolis and lived out the rest of his life there and was a very significant figure in the church there. That's Philip the Evangelist and not Philip the Apostle, one of the 7. And Philip the Evangelist has long been believed to have gone to Gaul, to France, but it's likely that he went to Galatia, which is not that far from Hierapolis, and not to Gaul. Philip the Evangelist is believed to have died in the 90s. And he and his daughters had tombs at Hierapolis that were visited by pilgrims for decades, maybe hundreds of years. His daughters were regarded as holy figures of the early church, and so people came to visit their tombs. Papias of Hierapolis is a key source here. He's born around AD 70 and lived to about AD 155. In his later years, he was the bishop of Hierapolis. He was, as a young man, a pupil of John the Apostle, who was down the road at Ephesus. He was a friend of Polycarp, who was later the bishop of Smyrna. He apparently knew Philip and knew his daughters. But that's likely to be Philip the Evangelist, who all those things are true of, in all those stories. And that the guy, if it's true that Bartholomew got into some trouble at Hierapolis, that it was Philip the Evangelist that was there, not Philip the Apostle. And if that is true, what happened to Philip the Apostle? Philip the Apostle, of course, is the guy that asked Jesus to show them more. He was a very earnest guy. He wanted to know. There's actually no really strong evidence that Philip the Apostle ever left Judea or Galilee, but there is some tradition that Philip the Apostle went to Carthage in North Africa, which the Romans had rebuilt, and that there he ministered for some significant time, founded a church, and was subsequently tied to a pillar and stoned to death by a radical Jewish sect called the Ebionites in AD 54. And if that's true, he was the second of the 12 after James the Greater to be martyred, and had the second shortest ministry. And that might be why we don't think that much about Philip the Apostle and think so much about Philip the Evangelist, who clearly lived a much longer life. So that's a couple of things about the two Philips. So the Philip on the right here, of course, is Philip the Apostle, who is often depicted as a fairly young guy. And so that might mean that he did not live to a great age. The guy at the left, top left here, is Philip the Evangelist. And of course, the four ladies at the bottom are the four daughters of Philip, who were prophetesses. And ancient sources say that at least two of them never married. And they were regarded as holy women of the very early church, and were listened to a lot. There's no real tradition about the names of the daughters, just the four, they're known as the four virgin daughters of Philip, who were prophetesses. But there's no real strong attachment of names, traditionally or otherwise, to any of them. But it is believed that at least two of them, and maybe all four, were eventually buried or entombed at Hierapolis, and that for a century or more, many people came to visit their tombs.